the moment has arrived. This is an amazing, amazing, gosh, I feel like I'm in kindergarten. So I just want to welcome both Ron and Deborah back. Deborah and Ron both have been a part of Rethinking Psychiatry for a very, very long time, and then Deborah became so involved in her project, she made that her life. Her work was just amazing, and it finally has paid off. And Ron, I think, did the website for her, which was critical for people to find that space where they could learn about that. So we are so lucky, we are so proud, and we are very excited to welcome Deborah and Michael. Michael, I don't know you, but if you've been working with Deborah, you must be an amazing person, and I'll get to hear all about you, and please share a little bit about you when you come up as well. All right, one big round of applause. Let's go.
Thank you. Thank you all for having us. I'm going to wing this pretty much. I did make some notes. I'm going to talk a little bit first, and then Michael's going to talk a great deal. I'm initially going to talk about, I have some social anxiety and some agoraphobia, but I know I'm here with my peers, and so I feel more relaxed.
We love you, Deborah.
So anyway, ECT Justice was started about 2011 after I detoxed self-detoxed off of 25 milligrams of Ativan. I sued my psychiatrist and settled out of court. When I cleared enough, I realized that what I was suffering with was traumatic brain injury, and as a trauma nurse, because I was so heavily medicated and so shocked so many times, 66 times, I wasn't clear enough to recognize that I was in fact consenting to traumatic brain injury. Had I been clear and not overly drugged, being a trauma nurse for 20 years, I would have realized the mechanism of trauma would induce a traumatic brain injury, but it was not clear. So I had 66 procedures. As a trauma nurse, I know that when a critical patient would come in, that we would throw everything at that patient if that patient was dying. Everybody's ideas were used. Everything was tried because the patient was going to die anyway. We'd try everything. And so when I started the website, I started wanted to see commonalities in patients, and so I decided to start a survey on the website to garner information from patients internationally around damages and lack of informed consent, with the idea that down the road I would like to try to bring a class action lawsuit. I don't remember a lot about starting the website. I have brain lesions on my frontal and temporal lobes. I have 3 abnormal neurocogs, and I have an abnormal EEG secondary to electroshock. The lesions are progressive. The lawsuit, I feel, wrote itself. I don't remember the hundreds of hours, but I'm told that I spent hundreds of hours at the mailroom in McMinnville researching lawsuits and writing 4 arguments on these lawsuits around Medicare fraud and product liability and medical malpractice, and also discrimination. I don't remember a lot of it. I don't remember the over 245 3-inch ring binders that were sent out to try to find representation. In 2016, there was the worldwide protest around electroshock. My website manager was charging me exorbitant prices to manage my site for this international worldwide protest. And so I had to fire her, but I didn't have the money to have somebody do my website. I didn't have the technical skills. I didn't even know how to, I was so shocked and so drugged, I didn't even know how to run an email. And so I really relied on my website person, but I couldn't afford her. And so I had to fire her. When the survey was started, I wanted to start doing protests right away. And I started running ads in the Willamette Weekly and in the Oregonian, looking for shock survivors. I have the recollection that a gentleman called me one day with the same passion I have for this issue. And he said, are you the one that put the ad in the paper? And he said, yes, I am. I said, who is this? He says, my name's Ron. And he said, I want to have lunch with you. And I'm like, is this a peer of mine? Or, who is this person? And so Ron, from the start, went to every single protest that we had. He was there right beside me all the way. And when I became discouraged and wanted to quit, we didn't quit. And Ron, in 2016, because he is CCHR and Scientology, he comes with a background that people don't support him with. And everybody has a right to religious choice. And so I made the choice to hire him. I paid him and I had him sign a contract to work on my website for ECT Justice. If it wasn't for this man, these lawsuits would have not happened. He ghostwrites these blog articles for me, except those that are personal, written by me. I don't have the intelligence to write those articles, and he maintains that website for us. Yeah, and for these lawsuits, and I commend him. So everybody's ideas were used, now we have interest. The lawsuit was brought in California by the DK Law Group. It was joined by the Michael Von Hedlund Group in the middle of the suit. The Kendrick Moxon law firm joined as well. There's 2 lawsuits pending against the FDA that were filed by Attorney Emord. And there's also another, one of the lawsuits filed by Attorney Emord and another lawsuit filed by Kendrick Moxon against the FDA as well. We have interest in medical malpractice now, and patients are now being interviewed in Canada for product liability suits now. The medical malpractice firms there's a firm in Florida and there's a firm in Georgia that are asking for other law firms to contact them. They feel overwhelmed with the amount of patients and facilities and physicians. And so we're referring like the asbestos firms, the people that sell the tobacco claim firms, the mesothelioma firms, to those law firms. They have interviewed some patients, but they have not signed anybody as yet. Medical malpractice has not been successful, except for one case in the past. And that was by Peggy Salters, who was a psychiatric nurse. She got too many shock in 1 week, and that's how she won her suit. So an argument was written that standard of care is currently met around standard of care is currently met with the use of electroshock as it is now, but standard of care is not being met around informed consent, and that has to be met as well. And currently most consent just states temporary memory loss for temporary memory loss for around the time of the procedure, expected to resolve in 6 weeks. But with electrical trauma, we're not just talking neurocognitive issues. We're talking cardiac issues. We're talking ophthalmic issues. We're talking respiratory issues. People are having dystonias from electrical trauma. These are NFL type head injuries. And all trauma is based on mechanism. And so these lawyers have been afraid, I'm sure, to take these lawsuits because you're dealing with a psychiatric population. But the beauty of this is because it's based on mechanism. As an ER trauma person, when you have a patient coming in that sustained this mechanism of up to 450 volts that resulted in unresponsiveness, retrograde amnesia, euphoria, and onset nausea, everybody knows it's traumatic brain injury at minimum. People are having cardiac issues now, demonstrating abnormalities on testing. And so the beauty of the mechanism of trauma is you don't have to have a reliable patient because you have an anticipated outcome. All patients have an anticipated outcome because of this electrical mechanism. And so standard of care is not met around informed consent because you're missing all the neurocog and all the cardiac and a whole host. And the sad issue is the physicians know what they're doing. They know it. And that's where patients get distressed, is coming to the realization when they start suffering these damages that their physician actually had this knowledge and actually did this to them. A lot of patients say it's been useful to me, it helped me, but it comes down to the physician has a duty to warn, a duty to protect, and a duty to not cause harm. And all these are not being done. And patients are being lied to by the very providers that are supposed to care for them. And it's heartbreaking. I want to say on the lawsuits, I utilized a great deal of research from my peers. A lot of my peers have been working behind the scenes because this is such a stigmatizing issue. A lot of work's been done, a lot of videos, a lot of research. A lot of their research was utilized for preparing these lawsuits. So it was not just me, it was all my peers around the world that I pulled information from. And so they need to be noted as well. They put in a lot of work over the years. I am grateful. I'm not going to talk anymore. If anybody has any questions for me, I'm happy to answer, and I'll have Michael talk. It was a product liability suit, and it was going to be a class action at one point. And so what they proved in court was that it causes brain damage. Not yet, but I hope there will be.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I hope so. I hope they're held accountable. Not that I know. And the sad thing is that people don't understand is we're not just talking about memory loss and cognitive loss. I have 2 grown sons, and I don't remember the life of my children. I don't remember one holiday, one birthday with my children. When I go to bed at night and I won't remember this meeting, probably later tonight. A year ago, maybe 2 years ago, I could hold on to some memory for a week. I can't. I see a therapist at the Portland Process Work Center. I have therapy, I go out to my car, I've forgotten the session. We have no short-term memory, and it devastates people's lives. Parents forget their children's lives, and they lose their ability to parent in the same manner. And a lot of children have to go into therapy because of their parents having electroshock, because they lose relationship memory. And I can't answer a question on that, just a second. And I recently took a trip, and within 36 hours, I met 2 people whose mothers had had electroshock. I found out that my neighbor, her father had electroshock, but nobody talks about this. The difficulty in addressing this is no media will touch it because there's billions of dollars involved. My peers are afraid to come out and speak out on social media, not just because they're ashamed of what's been done to them, and they're dumbed down by the apathy from brain injury. They're afraid of exposing their friends and their loved ones in speaking out about what's been done to them. And sadly, when you talk to these mothers and these fathers about their support systems, they don't want to burden their children with what they live with. So they can't share, and so they're isolated. They go to a neurologist and ask for help, and it's put off on being psychiatric drugs or true depression, because no neurologist wants to put in the notes this is neurocognitive injury secondary to electroshock, because everybody's going to get sued.
Well, they shouldn't think that way.
And so nobody gets help, and everybody denies damages. And I've had peers kill themselves as a result of this. I have had peers kill themselves. I had a woman that had an 18-month-old that I was trying to support in Colorado. She sent me a picture of her and her daughter. And then one day I didn't call her, she hung herself. She didn't have support, nobody would believe her. Her doctors would not believe her and get her help. And she was in an abusive marriage. And a lot of times women come into the system from abusive marriages, and these women get identified as being borderline or whatever, and then they get shocked and drugged instead of getting the support that they need. I say as far as shock that it shouldn't be done at all because of this traumatic brain injury, pure and simple. If it worked for them, that's their experience. That's like a woman on Facebook I recently acknowledged. She said it worked for me. But the thing is, a lot of my peers think it works for them, and then they go into neurocognitive testing, extensive neurocognitive, and then they break down in the middle of neurocog because they realize, oh my God, I can't do simple math like I used to, or I don't remember that, or I don't remember this, and they break down, and then they get mad, and then they feel betrayed.
Sure.
I don't think electroshock is an option.
Yeah.
Doctors are inflicting traumatic brain injuries. Of course, yeah, and I don't want to isolate alien, because that is their experience. But I think if they got testing, they may find that they've been injured, you know, and it might be advisable going forward, because a lot of patients now are experiencing CTE symptoms, like these NFL players are having CTE, and a lot of these patients are chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And there's a high incidence of going in and out of suicidality. There's a lot of suicidality that goes along with it, and it's not just from lack of support. There's something that happens with these traumatic brain injuries, as these NFL injuries, you know, show, with the violence and the suicidality. Yes. Well, that was the problem when I did my psychiatric med mal. Even though I had settled 2 previous suits, I worked as an RN for 20 some odd years. I had to approach over 65 firms to find med-mal representation for myself, and I finally found one in Portland. And then med-mal doesn't settle for anything compared to straight med-mal. You know, it's terrible. When you take the whole person that is injured, you know, for life based on what a psychiatrist did to them, you know, these are caretakers of the soul. You know, these people injure your soul through this procedure. Well, one other point on consent that's missing, that everybody should know, and I can't understand legally how they're getting away with it, is the experimental classification of both the device and the procedure are missing from consent. It's never had FDA testing for safety or effectiveness. We're talking 450 volts. It's never been, the devices that were sued over have never had pre-market approval. And one of the manufacturer that was sued is owned by a psychiatrist and lives right over in Vancouver, and actually was 1 floor below my psychiatrist I sued, and I never knew it. Yeah, that was interesting. I brought it up to my neurologist, and I gave him Linda Andre's book, Doctors of Deception, which is an excellent book for a resource.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So I just want to check in on the time.
Yeah, I'm going to have Peter talk.
Okay.
I mean, Michael talk.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
All right, over.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you all. I'm Mike Stoneman, and I had nothing to do with this lawsuit, or a series of lawsuits that Deborah has been talking about, but I certainly look up to her for pursuing it, and I look forward to more good results. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. When I was, I'm now 75, when I was 16, I was committed to a old-fashioned state hospital by my parents. And of course, it was compulsory that I have treatment, and I had medication. I had Thorazine, was just coming in at that time, so I had Thorazine, and I also had electroshock. Between 20 and 30 electroshock treatments. At that time, it was strictly the bilateral type, which are known to produce the most damage. And when the doctor put me to sleep, he gave me the muscle relaxant without, actually he didn't put me to sleep. He gave me the muscle relaxant without putting me to sleep first. And people ask me, how do I know that? Because I was there, and he would inject a drug into my vein, and within seconds I could not breathe. Because what the muscle relaxant does is it paralyzes all of your muscles, including your diaphragm, which is right above your stomach. It's a muscle that pumps your lungs. So I couldn't read, and of course that's horrifying and extremely painful. I don't think words can describe how painful it is. It's like somebody grabbing you on the street and choking you, or drowning, or something of that
How did
nature.
you cope with it?
How did I cope with it?
it? How did
They force you to take it. Yeah, but then, of course, later on, I had memories of it, and people often ask, how can I remember it? Because shock typically knocks out the memories around the treatment experience. And the reason is, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was recently confirmed to the U.S. Supreme Court, and Christine Ford testified against him.
Yeah.
And she maintained that when they were teenagers, she was forcibly raped or sexually abused by Justice Kavanaugh. And there was nobody to corroborate it, but she was a neuropsychology professor at Stanford, and she mentioned that because experiences such as that result in the secretion of norepinephrine, which is a neurotransmitter, what ordinarily you might forget, you will remember. Of course, something like that I will never forget. And for years afterwards, I had trouble concentrating. I would think back all the time, electroshock. When I first got out of the state hospital, my family was, every time I said something they didn't like, it's back to the state hospital, but of course they never did it, fortunately. And it cast an enormous shadow over my life, just the trauma by itself. Plus, the shock treatment, I think, damaged my brain significantly. And I was an honor student prior to my hospitalization. The year before, I got all A's and B's, and I had been for several years. Then when I came back to my high school, I was struggling to get by. I got B's and C's, and my marks kept going down. And the more challenging courses like chemistry, I just sunk to the bottom. And I had trouble with talking. I had word finding difficulties. If I wanted to say a simple something or other to somebody, I would hesitate. It would take me a long time to find the right words to say it. And that's a symptom of brain damage, of aphasia. And you find that frequently in people who've had strokes or concussions. And it took me years to overcome it. And I had, what I did is I made recordings of my voice. I have over 1,000 tapes that I have to get rid of now. And I would make them over and over again until I was satisfied with how I sounded. And that's how I regained my normal fluency. But also my pronunciation was way off, so I had to correct that. The state hospital, of course, offered very little in the way of treatment. I was 16 and they had a children's program, but they wouldn't put me in it because I was, I think, a half year too old. And so I was with the adult patients all the time I was there. And I was on chronic wards, and I was always terrified that, the next day they would tell me I did something, I didn't make my bed right or something, and that means a more shock treatment. You're not obeying. And it was basically the same philosophy as a prison. They try to keep people in line. I worked in a juvenile correctional program in Texas, and that's what they tried to do if somebody got out of line. They tried to come down on them real hard, and of course, and subsequently they got in trouble because they were so harsh. But eventually I got out of it. I had a lot of trouble getting out of this place, excuse me, they let me go to summer school. It was only a mile away to the local high school. And I was able to do that in spite of everything. And I remember trying to do my homework, and it was just so hard. And I tried to, we had to read a book. I remember we read The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane, which is about the Civil War. And I couldn't understand it, and I had to reread it. And I keep thinking about shock treatment and what they were going to do to me, and never getting out of the hospital, and so many things. But I got through it. I think I got an A in it. I don't know how. Anyhow, then my mother died, and I got real mad about being in the hospital. And my father was always very uninvolved with the children. He was a good worker. He made a good living, and that was all he wanted to do. And then all of a sudden had to raise 2 children, and he was slow in getting me out of this place. And at one point I just refused to do anything. I was so angry. And they put me on this back ward where they have patients that are chronic and they regard as incurable. And my aunt decided she would do something about it. And she arranged for me to be tutored at home 4 days a week by somebody from my local high school. And I did well in that, and they decided that I no longer needed to be in the hospital. And that's how I got out, and I think it's probably very lucky. And then I went back to face the cold water, and what was a matter with my brain, and what I could and could not do anymore. And the whole thing was so embarrassing, and I try to explain to people what had happened to me. I was so upset. You know, I needed somebody to talk to. Of course, nobody would believe anything I had to say, and my family would say, well, you're so much better now. And in a sense I was, and before I went into the hospital, I had terrible stomach pains. And every day I would have stomach pains, I had low energy, and I was very depressed. And I thought everybody was picking on me. Of course they would. They were to a certain extent, because this had been going on for 2 or 3 years, and I wasn't receiving any help beforehand until things completely got out of hand. And nobody would believe anything I had to say, and eventually I just shut up that nobody would understand, and that was, of course, a very terrible, I think they call that secondary traumatization, where people won't, for instance, a woman is raped, and nobody will believe her. And of course, that's a very common story today, and that further traumatizes the woman.
Medication.
Well, I had high doses of medicine when I was in the hospital, and they had gradually weaned me off. And when I came home, my father refused to allow me to have any medication, which I think hurt me quite a bit. And then after about 2 years, I got up enough nerve, and I went to a psychiatrist. Myself and Dad, as I said, with the children, he was generous with his money, even though he didn't believe in psychiatry. And I had a low dose of stelazine, which helped calm me down and enabled me to concentrate better, and lowered my anger and so on. So I think it did help me, but for a long-term solution, I think therapy helped me more than the medication. And one time I was taking Elavil, an antidepressant too, and it was so sedating that actually made me more depressed. It's supposed to be an antidepressant. And I had terrible sleep disturbance for years after I got out of the hospital. And anything could result in a poor night's sleep. So this Elavil is very sedating, so it helped me sleep. But then the next morning, there was this terrible hangover for the rest of the day, and I just decided it wasn't worth it, and I gave it up. And I've been off of medication now for 20 years. I think I'm much better off. Well, that was pretty much it. Then I went on to get 2 degrees in psychology, and I practiced as a clinician for 30 years until I retired in 2009. I just didn't think people would believe me, and then I didn't want to jeopardize my job. As soon as I come right out and say, well, I was at a state hospital, I had electric shock, that I didn't believe that it was the right thing, criminal acts were committed against me and so on. So immediately they get the feeling that there's something wrong and they treat you differently. That's true of a lot of different illnesses such as AIDS, even cancer. If you are cured of cancer, and a lot of employers are concerned about the cost of their health insurance. So you say, well, I had cancer, and of course then they'll say, well, you may relapse, and look how much that's going to cost me. So they may. I'm not saying they would. It's very cruel, but yes, some people benefit. Some people here said they benefited greatly, and then other people, such as Deborah and myself, were very critical. And the thing is, unless they do follow-up studies, they'll never find out how many are in each category, and they can't calculate the risk. If they say, well, we don't know what the risk is, take it anyhow, I would say that's negligence. They're not doing their job. And they should do follow-up. They do follow-up on antibiotics and all kinds of surgical procedures and hospital procedures, but for some reason they won't, and I think what they try to do is cover up. There are a dozen ways of doing it. I believe leading a healthy lifestyle and putting things in perspective. You know, if you make one mistake, that doesn't mean you're an idiot. And to get enough exercise, I'm a diabetic, so I have to exercise regularly, but that also helps me relax, particularly jogging helps me to sleep at night. I've had long-term problems with sleep disturbance, but if I go jogging in the late afternoon, it helps me a great deal. And finding something to do that you really like. Right now I'm into creative writing. I took a creative writing course through UCLA Extension, and I'm working on a novel on my personal experiences. Will be a fictionalized version. Since it happened so long ago, I wanted to put in some details I didn't know exactly if they were true or not. But I really enjoy doing that, and I live in a nice, quiet neighborhood, and I have everything I really need right now. I'm financially secure. Does that answer your question? I think everybody has to find their own. You know, you try various things. And
What about the lovely lady next to you, Deborah?
What I really enjoy, I like drumming. I have a drumming circle and a flute circle I go to, and I like to be out in nature and change my perspective. Sometimes when I'm really stressed, like I recently went to the Gorge and stayed in a nice Airbnb in the Gorge area, and it kind of resets my perspective being out in nature. I also have to exercise a great deal because I have high energy, sometimes even twice a day. I also experience severe sleep issues following electroshock. and I rarely dream anymore, which is a real loss for me. And I have spent a great deal with my friends, and I enjoy working with children too. I had my shock fairly recently. Last shock I had was in 2010. Yeah, it was fairly recently, and I had my career prior to that and signed off my nursing license in 2008. I was told I was incompetent to practice, of course, because of all the brain injuries and drugs I was being prescribed, so it was a smart idea. After shock, I was going to get my nursing license back. I did go to the board and was working toward that. It had been some time since I practiced, so it involved taking some classes to regain my license. And I know in taking those classes initially that I was so compromised I would be unsafe. The reason I wanted my nursing license back was because I had seen a program that was offered in Texas for nurses that wanted to train legally to work with medical malpractice firms, and I wanted to work with psychiatric med mal, and that's why I wanted my license back. So it worked out good, either way. So, yeah.
You have to kind of rewrite your autobiography and give your, in my case, I was a very depressed person, so I had to learn to see myself in a more positive way and to look at my problems in a less catastrophic way. In other words, if I lost something, it wasn't the end of the world, or if I had a small automobile accident, that wasn't the end of the world. I was still myself, I still had myself, and it's something very difficult for a depressive person to learn to like themselves, and that takes it took me a lot of therapy and a lot of rethinking, you might say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know that part. I don't understand that part of the law. I just know that they settled and that the suits will be ongoing and they're going to be... What's interesting is the person that I heard from in Canada that's being interviewed, because of the time constraints with every state and every country bringing lawsuits, she was interviewed by DK, the DK firm, and she's 6 years out from shock, so that's a very good sign. And the argument to extend time limits for patients outside of your time limits per state is the argument of anosognosia, which is the failure to recognize the extent of and severity of incurred neurocognitive damages. So patients weren't able to recognize damages, and so that should open up timeframes for people, and so that's encouraging in Canada. And I think and I think they're doing that in the United States too. And I think they're prepping for something really big to happen.
Well, I have to go now. I'd like to thank all of you for having me here. And I hope I've contributed something for you to think about and to realize that we are a community and that we share an experience, and we have to stay together, as somebody back there said, if we want to solve the problem.
You're welcome. You're both so very heroic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something to remember the title of that